Greetings, Seekers, and welcome back to DungeonFog. In this episode, we are going to be looking at probably one of the most important, if not the most important, tool in the entire DungeonFog platform. That is assets. That's right, the big one, assets. And while it is certainly one of the most important, if not the most important tool in the DungeonFog system, it is actually surprisingly easy to navigate through and to set up. So looking at our map as we have it right now, we have our brick foundation on the outside along with a wooden floor on the inside. And given that the name of the map is a travel lodge, we're going to be looking at creating sort of a rustic environment that most adventurers would probably stumble upon in their first encounter, usually as a first stopping point or as an initial departure. So we're going to be looking at creating more or less a tavern in that sense. And a lot of this video is going to be initially just showing you how assets are placed, and then we'll skip ahead closer to the end of the video showing you what a map would look like with a whole bunch of assets placed down. I won't walk you through all of that because once we walk through how to place our initial asset, it's essentially that multiplied by the number of assets that you're putting down. So without further ado, let's dive right in. We are going to navigate over to what is called the prop tool. Now, I always refer to it as assets. That's because I'm more familiar with the asset tool as in the previous iterations of DungeonFog, but basically prop tool, asset tool, whatever you want to call it, the chair icon is going to be where we want to go to start putting stuff in once we have everything figured out where we want to put it. But first things first, click on this prop here. Now it's going to navigate through all packs, which is fine. Let's get some tables going. Let's do that. So as I'm looking for a particular kind of asset, all asset packs that have that name table or tables in its name are going to appear. Now we can further drill this down and get into a specific asset pack if we're looking for a specific kind of look or feel that we're trying to create. Otherwise, you can jump into a specific asset pack and then navigate through all the different assets and props that that particular pack has to offer. We are going to look at rustic furniture assets and let's see what's here. And then let's dive into once more and see what the rustic asset pack. All right, so after we found our table asset, we can then look through our menu here at all the different types of tables available to us. Some are square with bands, others are round, some are broken, some are complete, some look more like workbenches, dining room tables. So whatever you want to go with. Once we have selected the asset that we want to use, it will then generate in this little prop box here, giving us not only the name, so table, round, large, it also tells us what asset pack it was from, and specifically the creator of that asset pack. So in this case, it is Rustic Furniture Assets and done by Kaora. Once we have an asset chosen, there's a number of different things that we can do with it. We can change the color. Again, I want to look at color changing inside the brush tool, so we're not going to really touch on this too much just yet, but you can change the asset color if you so choose. We have several transform options, much like our textures when we were laying down the walls and floors for building our room. We can set the rotation and the scale or the size and mirror the asset horizontally or vertically. That should there, and you can see it dynamically flipping within the asset box there, and we'll be able to see that as it gets placed down on the map. Under the randomize option allows us to let the system, DungeonFog, take over and randomly assign several values to it, such as the rotation, the degree rotation, the percentage scale, whether it will be super big or super tiny, mirroring horizontal and vertically. These are great tools if you're looking at just putting a bunch of assets down randomly. We'll also notice that when you're selecting one of these, you have a minimum option and a maximum option, which means I can tell the system what's the minimum amount of in this case, degrees rotation I want the object to be assigned, and the maximum range that it can go to. So in this case, it defaults to 0 and 360 degrees. Much like the scale can go from 10 to 1000% in size, but you can control that range simply by editing either one of those fields. So let's say I want minimum 50% and the maximum to be 100%. That means whenever I place an asset down, it will scale to a minimum of 50% and 100%. Make sure that after you put your percentage in, you hit the enter button or it won't save it. And same thing with the mirroring and horizontally, I can default this. So I generally like to use a random scale. If I'm placing things like trees or rocks or stones down, then I'll start randomizing the rotation as well. For the most part, when I'm looking at something that I want to create in a uniform setting, I'm going to keep the rotation fairly similar or manually adjust the rotation of each object as I go through it after I place it. Much like the doors and windows, we can choose its alignment, whether we can snap to grid off or on. Also, by hovering over, you can see that if you hold the shift key, you can temporarily toggle snap to grid, and we'll play around with a lot of the shortcut keys on the fly, but if you're ever curious as to what the shortcuts look like, they're down here for you. You can click on the shortcuts tool and it'll give you all the keystrokes and functions that are inherent in DungeonFog that you can navigate through to making your placing of assets much faster. If I were to select the drop shadow feature, what that will do is that will create an extended area and base, and that is essentially creating a small shadowed area around the object. The arrange tool allows me to basically manipulate how the layering of this object will operate after the asset's placed. So DungeonFog works on a system of layers, and I would recommend, as my number one piece of advice to new DungeonFog users, build from the bottom layer on top. What I mean is whatever's going to be on the very base of your floor. So if you're going to put down rugs, let's say, put those down first and then start putting stuff on top of it. It will make your life so much easier in the early going so that you don't have to worry about playing around with the layering and moving assets around to get them into the position that you want to make sure everything looks good. So we're going to see how all this operates as soon as I start putting assets down. You can either have it layering regular, which means that any asset you place down will exist on a layer, and then any future assets that are placed on top of that asset will sit above it, and it will build a stack upwards. You can place an asset above the walls, which means if I were to place an asset along any of these walls here, it would actually sit above it, which is very useful if you're doing things like lighting. Now that we have a basic understanding of all the different features that an asset can be manipulated by, let's actually start placing some assets down. And as I recommended earlier, we want to start from kind of the base level and work on top. Welcome back. As you can see, a lot of different things are going on here now that we have a more fleshed out cavern going for us here. I do want to take a couple of seconds to just copy these guys. So I'm going to Control D, which allows me to duplicate, grabs that asset and all of its configuration. I can do that again. Just for quick placement, if you're placing things like tables and chairs, Control D allows you to grab an object, duplicate that exact object settings, and allow you to replace that object in a new place while keeping the existing asset where it is. So it's just a quick copy-paste tool mechanic that I was using to put a lot of these chairs and lighting down. We're going to backtrack for just a second here, because as you can see, this is set up, this chair particularly that I'm highlighted on, is set up as a map decoration. And underneath the map decoration, it says that GM tools and lighting are unavailable for map decorations. And what that means is that this particular asset is something that just exists on the map. It doesn't interact with anything. So much like with this lighting here, what happens is there's a couple of extra things that pop up. Much like every other asset in the windows and doors, we can designate certain features with this asset. Does it need a key? If it does, it gets the red dot on it, exactly like a window or a door would. If it's concealed, it gets a little bit more transparent and less opaque and obvious to see. If it's trapped, it becomes highlighted in red. These are just little tools that you can use for specific assets to help remind you as the GM how your objects are supposed to interact when the players interact with them. There is another tool that pops up now, and that is lighting. So if an object is being placed down, you can designate whether or not it is a light source. By default, DungeonFog will designate anything that has a light element to it, such as a lit lantern or a lit torch, or if you're doing something more sci-fi, like a lit LED ceiling lamp or something like that. If it mentions that it is lit, it will automatically default as a light source, and that means that it is going to emit light that will affect other objects, their shadows, which we're going to get into when we get into the dynamic lighting tool very, very soon. Won't be in this episode, but for now, we can see that any of the torches that I've placed, in particular the one that I am highlighting right now, is designated by default as a light source. I can choose whether or not I want it to emit light, the color of the light I want it to emit, and then, of course, the color properties and features of the dynamic lighting that it is emitting. We're going to get into that when we actually start delving into the dynamic lighting feature and tool. Here, not going to worry about that for this video. Right now, it's all about just finding out where to find your assets, how to place them down, and how to get them to do what you want them to do. Now that we have a little bit more of a map set aside, we can then actually begin to look at how all of these tools are starting to build upon each other to create a far more living map that your players will then engage and interact with. We're going to see as we take each tool step by step how this map is going to turn from something that is very basic to something very intricate and interesting for your players to interact with and navigate. So that is going to do it for today's video. I want to thank you all very much for watching. If you are not subscribed to the channel right now, want to hit that sub button, that'd be greatly appreciated. If you also want to hit the bell icon for notifications for when a new video is uploaded, that way you don't miss any of the exciting new content that is coming up down the line, especially as we continue further and further into the more intricate tools of DungeonFog specifically. If you're not following me over on my Twitch channel, I stream generally once a week right now over at twitch.tv/EsquireVT. I would love to see you guys there. Check out some of the live content that we do. If you guys have any comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I appreciate all the support that you guys have been giving the channel so far, all the love these DungeonFog videos have been getting, and they are all for your use. They're all for your benefit. And if anything looks kind of confusing right now, don't worry. Rest assured, we will cover it in a video at some point, and make sure that if you do have any questions that we address them in the comments, and maybe even if necessary, if enough people are having the same question, what I will do is I will set up a separate video that will answer those questions, kind of like a frequently asked question video. That way you guys can see what everybody seems to be asking questions about and how we're answering them kind of in a real-time setting, more or less. Thank you guys very much again for watching. Appreciate you all so much, and we'll see you in the next video.